All right, Ninja Nerds, in this video we're going to talk about the thyroid hormone and its effects exerted on multiple different target tissues. All right, so before we do that, we need to first see, so if you guys have already seen our video on the synthesis of thyroid hormone, you guys are caught up. Because right now we have thyroid hormone circulating in the bloodstream, right? And if you remember, if we have thyroid hormone, it was bound to this protein that was made by the liver. And this protein, if you remember, was called thyroxine binding globulins, right? It was made by the liver, and it was transporting in it T3 and T4, our thyroid hormone. Before we look at how it's affecting all these different types of target organs, we have to look and see how it's actually working in this cell. What are the mechanisms by which this hormone is exerting its effects on these cells? So let's see here. Let's say that we have T3 and T4, right? Here's what we got to look at. T4 is going to be one of the more major components in the blood. Okay, so T4 is one of the more major components within the blood. Now watch what happens to this T4. And again, T4 is called thyroxine. T4, or thyroxine, has the ability to pass through the lipid bilayer. So look, it actually moves right through the lipid bilayer. When the thyroid hormone gets into this target tissue and it moves through the lipid bilayer, there's a specific set of enzymes in this area. One of these enzymes that work specifically within this area is called 5'-deiodinase. So it's called 5'-deiodinase. And what is this enzyme doing? It's removing an iodine off of what? The thyroxine, specifically on the 5' carbon. So this enzyme is removing a specific iodine residue. All right, so now let me actually show you exactly what's happening here with T4 and this 5' deiodinase. Let me show it over here in a better diagram. So let's say here's my tyrosine amino acid. If you guys remember, it was represented by that big circle. And here was another tyrosine amino acid, which was represented by that big circle, right? Now, if I were to be really, really specific, this circle is technically a 6-carbon ring. So I could say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? Same thing over here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And if you remember, we had iodines popping off. But what carbons are they popping off? Well, hey, this is confusing. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. These can't be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and these can't be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I actually have to say this is 1', 2', 3', 4', 5', 6'. That way I differentiate between these two. So technically the iodines are on the 3, the 5 over here, and then they're on the 3' and the 5'. So if I'm using an enzyme called 5' deiodinase, I'm pulling off an iodine. Which carbon am I removing it off of? This 5'. So imagine my hand is going to rip this thing off. That's what this enzyme is doing. It's ripping this off. When it rips it off of the 5' carbon, guess what T4 turns into? It turns into T3, the active form. This is the active form of the thyroid hormone, the triiodothyronine, right? Now, there is another enzyme that can rip it off the 5th carbon. What would he be called? 5-deiodinase. If that happened, if I ripped this iodine off the 5th carbon, this wouldn't be T3, it would be what's called reverse T3, which is inactive. Okay, that's inactive. We have to remember that. I know it's something so small, but it's very, very important. 5' deiodinase rips the iodine off of the 5' carbon to make it T3, which is the active. If it's 5-deiodinase, he pulls it off the 5 carbon and turns them into reverse T3, which is inactive. Okay. Now that we know that, we've got our active form. How is this going to exert its effects? It's going to come over here. You see there's a receptor waiting for him. Look, here's your T3. He's waiting to start binding onto this pocket. There's a little pocket. Let's say that this thing right here is actually called a transcription factor. Well, or even a receptor, right? So this is going to act like a receptor, but it has a transcription factor portion. So look what happens. T3 comes over here and binds onto this pocket. But he can't exert his effect on the DNA until something else comes over here and binds on this pocket. Guess what else comes over here and binds? retinoic acid. Retinoic acid. He comes over here and binds into this pocket. So what two things are binding into this pocket? One is T3, binds right into that pocket. The other one is retinoic acid, binds right into the pocket. Then this transcription factor is now active, and it can move into the nucleus and stimulate a specific gene sequence, a hormone response element. So look what's going to happen now. It's going to come in here, and it's going to stimulate a specific gene sequence. When it stimulates that specific gene sequence, this gene will then undergo transcription, it'll undergo translation, and what will be the overall result? It'll result in eventually protein synthesis. Look at this protein that we're drawing here. So what is this thing here called? This is a protein. So what was the overall result? T4 got turned into T3. T3 and retinoic acid, sometimes they even denote it, just in case you see it in the literature, it's also called RXR. It's just a short-term abbreviation for retinoic acid, because this is a heterodimer. Binds into the actual hormone response element, the gene, transcribes the actual gene to make mRNA, gets translated to make proteins. Look what these proteins are going to do. Love these proteins. They're going to get plugged into the membrane, all across the membrane. Look at this protein right here, this protein right here, and we'll put one more here, just because they're fascinating proteins. Look what these proteins are going to do. They love to pump 3 sodium ions out of the cell, and they love to pump 2 potassium ions into the cell. So what would this one be pumping out, guys? Say it out loud with me. 3 sodiums pumping out, and then 2 potassiums pumping in. 3 sodium out, 2 potassium ions in. These are sodium potassium ATPases. What did I just say? ATPases. They require ATP. So for this step right here, ATP has to react and get converted into ADP. Same thing here. ATP would have to react here and get converted into ADP. And then same thing here. ATP would have to react here and get converted into ADP. What do you notice, guys? I'm using a lot of energy. I'm using a lot of energy to power these pumps. Guess what thyroid hormone's doing? He's increasing the expression of these proteins on our body cells. If we make more of these proteins, we have more sodium-potassium pumps. If we have more sodium-potassium pumps, we start burning the ATP. So in result, what's going to happen to the ATP levels? You're going to have a decrease in cellular ATP. Now, if you guys think about it, since we already know this, I'm going to erase this, guys. Since you already know that ATP is a product of metabolism, if our ATP is going down, that's not a good thing. Why? Because then we can't power the muscles, we can't power these pumps, we can't power a lot of cellular activities. So what do we need to do then? We need to start burning more fuel. So what's going to happen? If you have a decrease in cellular ATP, what's that equation, guys, for cellular respiration? It goes C6, H12O6 plus 6 oxygens to yield, what is it, 6 CO2 plus 6 water, right? And then as a result, you're making ATP and heat, right? This is a result of that reaction. Well, the ATP is decreasing, so we need to make more ATP. So what are we going to do? We're going to provide more fuel. So what's going to happen then? We're going to start burning more carbohydrate molecules or fat molecules or protein molecules, right? And we're going to use more oxygen for this pathway to occur. So what starts happening to the amount of oxygen? It's going to increase in usage. So there's going to be an increase in oxygen usage. And if there's an increase in oxygen usage, it's not just good for burning carbohydrates, but also good for burning all different types of macromolecules. So in summation, what's going to happen to the overall metabolism or the metabolic rate? It's going to go up, okay? Not that bad, right, guys? So increase in metabolic rate. And if you think about it, if this reaction is occurring excessively, what else am I going to produce a lot of? A lot of heat. And so when you're producing a lot of heat, what else are you going to notice? You're going to get a little hot, right? So again, it's going to have a increase heat production as a result of an increase in metabolic rate. It's right there in the equation, you know what I mean? It's easy to see. Okay, so that's that part there. So far we know exactly how it's affecting these cells at the molecular level and what it's doing. What else could it be doing though at the molecular cellular level or organellular level? I didn't draw this for no reason, guys. There's a mitochondria there. Mitochondria are responsible for what? Being able to use the different types of macromolecules and the oxygen to produce ATP. But in in this event, and there's a decrease in cellular ATP, and then our body's going to have to compensate that to cause more oxygen, more macromolecules to rush into this mitochondria. Just like with one thing, I can't do a whole bunch of things at one time, and I won't be able to do it very well. So he needs to make more buddies. So what's he going to start doing? He's going to start making more mitochondria, and on top of that, the mitochondria are going to get bigger. So what's going to happen to the mitochondria number? It's going to increase. So you're going to have increased number of mitochondria, and the mitochondria are going to get bigger because of their activity. So increase in the number of mitochondria and size. We'll call it hypertrophy, right? Okay. And that should make sense because he's the one who's responsible for being the powerhouse of the cell, making ATP. Okay? So if you need to make more, he's got to be able to compensate and get bigger and make more of him. All right. That's that part. Now that we've done that, all the rest of the stuff is going to be pretty darn easy now. Let's look at what it does in the liver. Since we're on metabolism, let's look and see what it does on the liver, because it does a lot of stuff here in the liver. You know, one of the main goals of thyroxine is he wants to try to increase your blood glucose levels. That's one of his desires. So he comes over here, and there's two ways in which he does that. I have inside of this liver cell, I'm going to draw this guy. You see this guy here? This is going to be a glycogen molecule. So this right here is called glycogen. So again, what is this guy here called, guys? It's called glycogen. All glycogen is just a storage molecule of glucose. It's just a polymer, a long chain of glucose. Okay, that's all it is. But what happens is this glycogen can get converted into glucose, but how? Thyroid hormone. So now let's say that here's thyroid hormone. Let's see what he does. He's going to exert his effects through this actual mechanism in here, right? Similar mechanism to help him make proteins, and then what's going to happen? As a result, these proteins are going to trigger the conversion of glycogen to glucose. What is this event called? Glycogenolysis. I'm cutting the glycogen. So what is this event here called where I'm breaking down glycogen into glucose? This event here is called glycogenolysis. Not bad. And then what's the result? Well, then guess where that glucose is going to go? It's going to come out of the liver and into the blood. And what's going to happen to the glucose levels in the blood? The glucose levels are going to go up in the blood. So there'll be hyperglycemia. Okay? What else? He can do another thing. You know that the liver has a lot of things like glycerol? He has a lot of glycerol in this area here. He has a lot of amino acids in this area here. So he has a lot of glycerol. He has a lot of amino acids, and he has a lot of lactic acid. So I'm going to put lactate here. A lot of lactic acid here, because lactate is just the conjugate base, right? Look what happens here. You can take glycerol, you can take amino acids, and you can take lactate and convert this into glucose. Oh my goodness, it's beautiful. Okay, so we made the glucose. If you look, I made glucose from glycerol, amino acids, and lactate. That seems like an interesting pathway, right? Guess what this pathway is? So guess who else stimulates this? Obviously, it's going to be thyroid hormone. That's what we're talking about, right? So look what he does. He stimulates this pathway too. You know what this pathway is called whenever you make glucose from non-carbohydrate sources? It's called gluconeogenesis. Love it. So it stimulates gluconeogenesis. You know what else he's really cool at doing, and I love it? You know there's a lipoproteins inside of our bloodstream. You've heard of LDL molecules? So they stand for low density. Ooh, let's do them with this marker here, color. See this guy here? This is called low density lipoproteins. Bad cholesterol, not good. What thyroid hormone does is he's actually going to stimulate the liver to make many, many receptors for this LDL particles. So now look what he does. T3 and T4 actually come over here and stimulate this guy here. Look what he does. Let's actually say we draw this part here in red. He increases the number of, what is this right here? LDL receptors. So who's doing this reaction here? This is the job of T3 and T4. So he's also causing what? The stimulation of LDL receptors. If there's many LDL receptors, what's going to happen to this LDL in the blood? It's going to get taken out of the blood and then taken into the liver and utilized in certain metabolic pathways. But overall, what's it doing to the LDL levels in the blood? It's decreasing them. So what is it doing here? It's increasing LDL uptake. And all that means is just taking it into the liver. Okay? Beautiful. We've gotten that. Okay, let's just move on. Let's go to the heart, and then we'll go up to the CNS. So heart, what is it doing on the heart? Oh, it's amazing what it does on the heart. It comes over to the heart, and it's like, hey, I want you to make a specific receptor. I want you to make a protein. And the receptor that I want you to make, I want it to be specific for not me, but for something else. So look what he does. He goes over here in the myocardium of the muscle, and he increases the expression of, let's say I actually zoom in on one of these cells, right? And here comes T3 and T4. They come in to this cell, exert their effects on this nucleus, and look what they plug into the membrane up here. Look what gets plugged into the membrane. They do this. They stimulate this pathway. Guess what this receptor is? This is a beta-1 adrenergic receptor. Who binds onto beta-1 adrenergic receptors? Epinephrine and norepinephrine, right? So if there's epinephrine there, or norepinephrine, these guys can bind onto this receptor. And what's the overall result here? They're going to have an increased contractility. And if there's increased contractility, what's going to happen to the stroke volume? It's going to go up. What happens if the stroke volume goes up? Cardiac output goes up. And what if cardiac output goes up? Blood pressure goes up. So overall, with this, there's an increase in cardiac output, and we can put slash blood pressure. Oh man, that's cool. You know where else it does it? It does it on these little specialized non-contractile muscle cells. So over here, it acts on the SA node or the AV node. Same thing. So it's going to act on these guys. And look what it's going to do. It's going to increase the expression of beta-1 adrenergic receptors. So who else is going to come in here and bind now? Norepinephrine and epinephrine. And then what would be the result if they bind onto this receptor, the SA node or the AV node? If you remember from the extrinsic innervation video, what is it to result? It stimulates the increase in action potentials. So there'll be an increase in heart rate. It makes so much sense, doesn't it? When you put it together and stuff like that. Because that's the overall goal of our channel, is to make things make sense, not just to memorize it, right? So again, what would be? Increase in heart rate. And you guys know whenever there's an increase in heart rate, there is an increase in blood pressure as a result. So we can even put here, I could put slash BP. Okay. That's it for the heart. Okay, so that should make sense, guys. All right. Let's go to the CNS. He's really important within the central nervous system, specifically for the development of it. So in the central nervous system, he's really, really helping. You know when you have a neuron here? Neurons have a lot of dendrites and stuff like that, right? So a lot of dendrites coming off of it. Just these little extensions coming from the cell body. Then it has the axon, then it has the terminal bulb, right? In general here. What thyroid hormone does is, he helps to make more dendrites. So he helps with the dendrites. So what's one effect of the thyroid hormone here? He increases dendrite formation. So he increases the number of dendrites. You know what else he does? He's really, really cool. You know what else is actually wrapping around these guys here? It's actually made up of fat and protein and a lot of different other types of molecules that help for this actual action potentials moving down this way to be faster and skip along it, called saltatory conduction. This is myelin. He helps to increase myelination. So he increases, butchered that name right there. This is called myelination. And why would you want it to be more myelinated? So that there be faster action potentials. And he's increasing the number of synapses. What is a synapse? Let's say here's a presynaptic neuron, here's another neuron. If you have more of these synapses here, you're going to have more action, like more different types of neurochemical reactions, right? So in general, there's going to be an increase in synapses. Okay. So overall within the central nervous system, it's making more dendrites, more myelination, and increasing the number of synapses within the CNS. That should make sense. If you ever know anybody who has hyperthyroidism, what are they? They're always like geeked out, right? They're anxious, they're irritable, they have a lot of like, everything's going on really, really fast because there's increased myelination, so increased action potentials, more dendrites to receive those signals, more synapses. So because of that, what are they gonna have? Anxiety, irritability, right? A lot of different types of anxiousness. That should make sense. Okay, so that's it for the CNS. What about in the bone? So it's for the bone, it's doing some really interesting stuff. So you know within the bone you have two different types of really important cells here. One is called osteoclasts, and the other ones are called osteoblasts. And osteoclasts are the ones that we know are responsible for breaking down the bone, or they call it bone resorption, right? So they really call it bone resorption. Bone resorption. And then the osteoblasts are really important for being able to deposit certain things into the bone. So they're good for bone deposition. The thyroid hormone here is regulating the balance between the two. So you don't want there to be excessive osteoblastic, and you don't want there to be excessive osteoclastic activity. Okay, so now what is thyroid hormone doing? He's maintaining the balance between the two. So let's say here's a little balance beam, if you will. Over here we're gonna have, on this side, we're gonna have osteoblasts. And on this side over here, we're gonna have osteoclasts. Thyroid hormone is keeping these guys balanced. So thyroid hormone is keeping these guys in an appropriate balance so that there's not excessive osteoblastic activity or excessive osteoclastic activity. You know what else he's helping to do? He works at these epiphyseal plates. And when he works at these epiphyseal plates, he loves to cause the epiphyseal plates to grow in length. What is that called when you're growing in length at the epiphyseal plates? It's called interstitial growth. So it loves to stimulate interstitial growth. Interstitial growth. So it works in here on these chondrocytes and causes them to undergo proliferation, hypertrophy, and then eventually calcification, right? So it'll make more bone so that the bone can elongate, right? You know what else it helps to do whenever the baby's developing or they're growing? Endochondral ossification. So it helps to be able to turn the hyaline cartilage. You know, endochondral ossification, you start with the what's called a perichondrium, and then it turns into a periosteal bone collar, and then the periosteal bud invades, and a whole bunch of different types of activity occur, right? Where you're basically turning the cartilage into bone. Thyroid hormone helps that activity. We'll talk about that in more detail when we get into bone physiology. But in general, what is it doing here on the bone? It's increasing. It's actually stimulating. We shouldn't say increasing. It's stimulating and regulating endochondral ossification. So you can imagine here that it's positive effects with the actual bone. It wants to help with keeping the bones growing, and also he plays a role in bone remodeling too. Let's list that one too. He also plays a role in bone remodeling. What does that mean? So bone remodeling. Really what that's saying is it's regulating the activity of these guys, the osteoblastic and osteoclastic activity. Because that's really what bone remodeling is. If you want to make more bone, you stimulate the osteoblastic activity. If you want to decrease the amount of bone, it's going to be osteoclastic activity. So it's regulating bone remodeling by keeping the balance between these two. Okay, let's go into the adipose tissue. All right, so let's look at this fatty. All right, over here we got the adipose tissue. In the adipose tissue, you know what's the main component within the adipose tissue? Triglycerides. If you've ever known anyone who's hyperthyroid, you'll know that they're pretty thin. They're burning calories like a mofo. Why? Because thyroid hormone is really good at being able to increase the breakdown of this process here. So you know what happens here? You have receptors, okay, which are again for inside of the cell for the thyroid hormone, right? And what it does is it activates specific enzymes. Let's actually draw these enzymes here in blue. Look at what these enzymes are. Oh, it's little scissors. The scissors are back. What are these scissor enzymes doing? They're cutting the triglycerides. They're breaking the triglycerides into the constituents, glycerol and fatty acids. How are they doing that? It's activating these specific enzymes inside of the cell. So this is called lipolysis, where it's breaking down the triglycerides into, what would come out of here? If I were to look at this cell and it's cutting and it's popping something out over here, what are the two constituents? One is it's going to be the fatty acid chains. So what is this called? Fatty acid chains. And what's the other component? The glycerol. And where did that glycerol? Didn't we talk about glycerol before? Yeah, we did. Where did we talk about it, guys? If you come over here, it's in the liver. Guess where that glycerol is coming from? From the adipose tissue. You see how it's connecting? That glycerol comes from the adipose tissue into the liver, and then we use that to make glucose. Thyroid hormone's so smart. Okay, so that's what it's doing here in the adipose tissue. What is it doing in the muscles? Now, thyroid hormone, they're still trying to figure out the mechanism of how it's actually working with inside of these muscles, specifically with proteins. But what they believe for it to be doing here in the muscles is, within protein metabolism, so if we have protein metabolism, if I use the word metabolism, that means the sum total of catabolism and anabolism. So let's say here I have proteins, and then I have amino acids, right? Because that's the constituents. Those are the building blocks or the monomers of proteins. But then you can use these amino acids to make proteins. So if I go from proteins to amino acids, this is called catabolism. And then if I go from amino acids to proteins, this is called anabolism, right? Anabolism. Thyroid hormone is regulating the activity of both of these to keep them, again, in a nice balance. So what is thyroid hormone doing here? Thyroid hormone is stimulating anabolism, and thyroid hormone is also stimulating catabolism. So he's modulating the activity between these two pathways. Now, if someone becomes hyperthyroid, it shifts to catabolism. So that's something to remember. Normally, it's maintaining this metabolism, which is the sum total of catabolism and anabolism. But whenever the person's making too much thyroid hormone, it switches from anabolism to mainly catabolism. That's why if someone's hyperthyroid, their muscles are really weak, they're really small, okay, they're atrophied, and sometimes they might have very, very weak muscle movements, right? Not that they're lethargic, there's a difference. It's just they're very weak, they're atrophied, okay? That's the difference. All right, now let's come over to this integumentary system, the skin. It's very cool, and this should actually make the most sense. If you're really, so what is thyroid hormone doing? We said it's increasing your metabolic rate, so your temperature is going up. If your temperature is going up, what's going to happen at the skin? If I'm really, really hot, like right now, I'm sweating. Okay, that doesn't mean my thyroid hormone is actually elevated, but whenever the body temperature is going up, your body has to try to regulate that internal body temperature. So how does it do it? You see these blood vessels here underneath? This is the skin, right? So here, let me actually just tell you all the parts of the skin. It's not relevant here, but it's just cool, I guess. So let's mention all of these. So this top layer here is called the stratum corneum. Then the next layer, this green layer, is only present in thick skin, but if it's in thin skin, you won't find it. But it's called stratum lucidum. Okay, stratum lucidum. This black layer is going to be called the stratum granulosum. So it's called the stratum granulosum. This purple layer here is called the stratum spinosum. Stratum spinosum. And then this last blue layer here is called the stratum basale. So the stratum basale. This makes up the epidermis, right? Now, what happens is you have blood vessels running in the dermis. When it gets really, really hot, these actual blood vessels, guess what they do? They dilate. If they dilate, a lot of blood flow comes to this area. If a lot of blood flow comes to this area, what's going to happen? You're going to notice that their skin looks nice and soft. It's nice and flushed with fluid, right? and it's going to allow for them to have nice skin, the nice actual like reddish hue to their skin, right? But also what's going to happen? They're going to be radiating heat. Another thing, what happens when you're really hot? You sweat. So what's going to happen to these little eccrine or merocrine sweat glands over here? They're going to start producing sweat. Plus, what does the thyroid hormone do? It increases the sensitivity of catecholamines like epinephrine and norepinephrine. You know epinephrine and norepinephrine act on these sweat glands. And again, what's the result here? You're going to produce sweat. And that sweat, what does it allow for? It allows for the water to sit over this area and trigger what? Evaporative cooling. Okay? So again, what's the result here at the integumentary system? It's going to cause these blood vessels in the dermis to dilate, to increase the blood flow, to radiate heat off the skin, right? To try to bring the internal body temperature back down. And because of not only just the body temperature going up, but also remember the sympathetic nervous system is enhanced, the sensitivity. They're going to act on these eccrine or merocrine sweat glands and cause sweat production. And then what's that going to do? It's going to layer the skin and cause evaporative cooling to bring the body temperature down a little bit. Okay, so that's its effect there. So you'd imagine if someone is having hyper, their face would be nice and actual, flushed with fluid. And sometimes it actually might even be a little bit swollen a little bit. But in general, it's going to have a nice color to it also. Also, not only integumentary system consists of your nails too. So you'll notice that people have hypothyroid, their nails are really, really brittle. Okay, so very, very brittle. Whereas if you think about hyperthyroidism with the hair, usually the hair is thick. But if it's hypothyroid, the hair is very thin. Okay? Okay, last one, GI tract. What is it doing? You know, there's a lot of glands here. A lot of glands that are actually all over the place here. And these glands are secreting all different types of substances. So here, let's say here's some gland secretions here. You know who's controlling these glandular secretions? Thyroid hormone. So thyroid hormone is actually helping to stimulate these secretions of the actual GI tract, because you know you need secretions to occur. You need a lot of alkaline fluid within this area here. You need a lot of intestinal fluid for a lot of these actual GI processes to occur effectively. You know what else is happening? Smooth muscle. You know, there's smooth muscle throughout this entire area here. That's primarily what the GI tract is consisting of, is smooth muscle. You know who actually works on these smooth muscle cells? You bet it, thyroid hormone. And if thyroid hormone is working here on these smooth muscle cells, it's enhancing the motility normally. So it helps with normal motility of the GI tract. So what's the normal functions here of thyroid hormone then? It's affecting normal motility, and it's affecting GI excretions or secretions. So what is it going to do here to this actual motility here? It's going to increase the motility. So what's the overall effect here? It's going to increase motility, and it's going to increase secretions. Now, you can think about this. If you think about with someone who has excessive amounts of thyroid hormone, they're making too much thyroid hormone. What's going to happen to the GI motility? It's going to increase. What's going to happen to the GI secretions? It's going to increase. What's going to happen to these people? They're going to have diarrhea. They're going to pee out their butthole. Okay? So they're going to be having a whole bunch of diarrhea. Whereas, if someone is having very little thyroid hormone, what's going to happen to the GI motility? It's going to be slow. Okay? What's going to happen to the secretions? It's not going to have as much. And what's going to happen? That poop's going to get stuck up in there. And you're going to get constipated. And you're going to have a hard time being able to evacuate your bowels, right? So again, this should make sense how it's helping normal GI motility and secretions. All right, Ninja Nerds, we covered a lot in this video. I really hope all of this made sense. I hope you guys enjoyed it. In the next video, we're going to try to talk about specifically hyper and hyposecretion and certain clinical correlations with thyroid hormone. Until next time.